There is a place on Earth that should not exist. A structure so old, so precise, and so conceptually advanced that it breaks the timeline of human history the moment you look at it. Long before cities, before writing, before agriculture, something was built that required planning, coordination, and knowledge we are told didn't exist. And yet, it's real. Buried for thousands of years, hidden intentionally, almost as if it was never meant to be found. We call it Göbekli Tepe, but the name explains nothing, because the deeper you look, the less sense it makes. Around 11,600 years ago, during a time when humans were supposedly scattered hunter-gatherers, groups with no permanent settlements somehow gathered on a hilltop in what is now southern Turkey. They had no metal tools, no domesticated animals, no written language, and yet they began constructing something massive. Not shelters, not villages, but stone enclosures made of pillars weighing up to 50 tons. This wasn't survival, this wasn't necessity, it was intention. But intention for what? Because nothing about this aligns with what we think early humans were capable of. The pillars themselves are shaped like giant T-forms rising up to 18 feet tall, carved from solid limestone. But then something doesn't make sense. These weren't random stones placed haphazardly. They were cut with precision, transported across uneven terrain, and erected with careful alignment. Some stand in perfect circles, others in complex geometric arrangements. The level of planning required suggests something organized, something structured. But where did that structure come from if society itself hadn't even formed yet? And that's where everything changes, because the carvings on these pillars aren't crude or primitive. They are detailed, intentional, and consistent. Animals appear again and again: foxes, snakes, birds, scorpions, each rendered with striking accuracy. But alongside them are abstract symbols, humanoid figures, and patterns that repeat across different enclosures. This isn't decoration, it's communication. But communication of what? Because there is no known language from this time, and yet something is clearly being said. Archaeologists expected to find signs of daily life, tools, waste, fire pits, homes, but they didn't. There are no houses, no evidence of people living there, which raises a disturbing possibility. This wasn't a settlement, it was something else entirely, a place people traveled to rather than lived in, a center of activity with a purpose that doesn't match survival. And that shouldn't be possible, because organized gathering at this scale requires social structure, and social structure requires development. But here, the order appears before the origin. Multiple enclosures were built over time, at least 20 spread across a wide area. But here's the contradiction. The oldest structures are the most precise. The earliest pillars show the highest level of craftsmanship, the most accurate alignments, the most complex carvings. And then over time, that precision begins to fade. Later structures become less refined, less accurate, less detailed. That's when the pattern breaks, because human development is supposed to move forward, but here it appears to be moving backward. This suggests something unsettling, not progress, but decline, as if the builders of Göbekli Tepe weren't discovering knowledge, but losing it, as if the earliest creators understood something that later generations could not fully replicate. But how do you lose knowledge that was never supposed to exist in the first place? Unless it didn't originate there, unless it was inherited. And if it was inherited, then from where? Around 10,900 BCE, something happened on Earth. A sudden shift in climate known as the Younger Dryas brought extreme cooling, environmental disruption, and possibly catastrophic events. And some researchers believe that the carvings at Göbekli Tepe may be recording it, not metaphorically, literally, because certain symbols arranged in specific patterns appear to align with constellations and celestial movements. But that shouldn't be possible, because astronomical mapping requires observation over long periods and systems of recording. And that's when one specific pillar begins to stand out. Known as the vulture stone, it contains a dense cluster of symbols arranged in a way that doesn't appear random. Birds, scorpions, abstract shapes, all positioned with deliberate spacing. Some researchers believe this is not art, but data, a representation of the sky, possibly even a record of a catastrophic comet event. But if that's true, then someone was watching the sky and understanding it, because that level of observation implies continuity, generations tracking patterns, recording cycles, identifying anomalies. But there's no evidence of that continuity anywhere else from this time. No writing systems, no instruments, no supporting infrastructure, just stone and symbols. And that's what makes it uncomfortable, because the knowledge seems real, but the context is missing, like finding a finished puzzle with no pieces leading up to it. The construction itself raises even more questions. The stones were quarried using methods that appear far more advanced than simple tools would allow. Some cuts are so clean they resemble machine work. Others suggest the use of heat and rapid cooling to fracture stone with precision. And then there's the placement. Massive pillars positioned in a way that distributes weight evenly, allowing for structural stability even in seismic conditions. That shouldn't be accidental. That's engineering. But where did that knowledge come from? And then something even stranger emerges. The site appears to have been deliberately buried, not abandoned, not destroyed. Buried. Layers of soil, stone, and debris were placed systematically, covering the structures in a way that preserved them almost perfectly. This wasn't collapse, it was intention. But why would a civilization go to such lengths to hide something they built? And more importantly, what were they trying to protect? Because burying something requires foresight. It suggests an awareness of time, of future discovery, of preservation beyond immediate use. And that implies something even deeper, a message, not just for themselves, but for whoever would come after. But that idea introduces a problem, because it assumes they understood something about the future, something about us. And that's where the line between archaeology and speculation begins to blur. After the burial, something shifts in the surrounding region. Societies appear simpler, less organized, less complex. It's as if whatever knowledge existed before was suddenly gone, lost, forgotten. And that shouldn't happen. Civilizations build on what comes before. They don't reset, unless something forces them to, unless something interrupts continuity. And if that interruption happened, then Göbekli Tepe might not be the beginning of civilization. It might be what's left after something else ended. For nearly 10,000 years, the site remained hidden. No disturbance, no erosion revealing its secrets, just silence. Until the 1960s, when initial surveys dismissed it as a medieval cemetery. Nothing unusual, nothing significant. And that's where everything almost ended, because sometimes the greatest discoveries are the easiest to overlook until someone looks again and sees what wasn't supposed to be there. In 1994, a local shepherd noticed stones protruding from the ground, shapes that didn't match the landscape. That small observation led to a larger investigation, and soon archaeologist Claude Schmidt began excavations that would change everything. What he uncovered wasn't just old, it was impossible. Radiocarbon dating confirmed it. This site predates Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids by thousands of years. And suddenly, the timeline of human history wasn't just questioned, it was broken. But here's the unsettling part. Less than 10% of the site has been excavated, which means everything we think we know is based on a fraction of what's actually there. Ground-penetrating radar suggests there are more structures buried deeper, possibly older, possibly more complex, and that raises a disturbing possibility. What we've uncovered might not be the beginning. It might be the surface of something much larger. Modern attempts to replicate the construction methods have failed. Experimental archaeology cannot reproduce the same level of precision using the tools available at the time, and that creates a contradiction that refuses to resolve. Either our understanding of those tools is wrong, or our understanding of the builders is incomplete, and neither option is comfortable because both imply a gap in knowledge that shouldn't exist. Recent technological analysis has pushed the mystery even further. 3D scanning and AI pattern recognition have revealed that the symbols are not randomly distributed. They follow patterns, repetition, structure. Some researchers now believe this could represent a proto-writing system, a form of encoded information, not language as we know it, but something close, something intentional. And that changes everything, because it suggests the carvings were meant to be read. And if they were meant to be read, then by whom? Because encoding information assumes an audience, a recipient, a future observer, which brings us back to the burial, the preservation, the timing. It begins to feel less like a coincidence and more like a design. But that leads to a question that becomes harder to ignore. Were the builders leaving something behind or passing something forward? Comparative analysis across different enclosures shows a measurable decline in astronomical accuracy over time. Early structures align more precisely with celestial events, while later ones drift slightly off. It's subtle but consistent, and that reinforces the idea of knowledge degradation. But knowledge doesn't just fade without reason. It disappears when systems collapse, when continuity breaks. And that suggests something larger may have been lost. So now we're left with a contradiction that refuses to resolve. Primitive humans building something that requires advanced knowledge, or advanced knowledge existing long before we thought possible. Both options challenge everything we believe about our origins, and neither fits comfortably within the current model of history, which means something is missing, something we haven't accounted for. But what if the problem isn't the evidence? What if it's the interpretation? Because every conclusion we draw is filtered through what we think is possible, and Göbekli Tepe doesn't fit within those boundaries, so we try to force it, simplify it, explain it away. But what if it was never meant to fit? What if the contradiction is the point? Because decoding the site isn't just about understanding the past, it's about questioning the framework we use to interpret it. We assume linear progress, we assume development from simple to complex, but Göbekli Tepe suggests something else entirely, something non-linear, something fragmented, and that possibility introduces a new kind of uncertainty. Maybe we're not looking at the birth of civilization. Maybe we're looking at its aftermath, the remnants of knowledge that survived something we don't fully understand, preserved just long enough to be discovered again, but not fully enough to be explained. And that creates a tension that doesn't resolve, it explains. Because the deeper we go, the less stable the narrative becomes. The more we uncover, the more we realize how much remains hidden, not just underground, but within our assumptions, within the limits of what we're willing to consider possible. And that's where the real shift happens, not in the stones, but in the way we see them. At some point, the question stops being, what is Göbekli Tepe? And becomes something far more uncomfortable. What are we missing? What are we unable to see because it doesn't fit our expectations? Because the site doesn't just challenge history, it challenges perception itself. The idea that we understand the trajectory of human development begins to feel less certain. And maybe that's the real message, not encoded in symbols or alignments, but in the contradiction itself. A structure that shouldn't exist, forcing us to confront the limits of our own understanding. Because if something this complex could appear this early, then what else have we misunderstood? And that leads to a final possibility that is harder to ignore the longer you sit with it. That Göbekli Tepe is not an anomaly, not an exception, but a fragment, a surviving piece of something much older, much larger, and already fading when it was built. A memory carved in stone of knowledge already being lost. But if that's true, then the real question isn't about the past at all. It's about us, about what we assume, what we overlook, and what we might be misinterpreting right now. Because if knowledge can disappear once, it can disappear again. And if we're already missing something, how would we even know?